The morning sun cast golden rays through the towering oak trees of Magnolia Gardens in Charleston, South Carolina, creating the kind of magical lighting that photographers dream about. Spanish moss swayed gently in the humid breeze, and the scent of jasmine and magnolia blossoms filled the air. After 2 years of planning, my wedding day had finally arrived, and everything was absolutely perfect. I stood in the bridal suite of the historic mansion, staring at my reflection in the antique mirror. The vintage lace dress that had belonged to my grandmother fit like it was made for me, and the pearl necklace that had been in our family for 3 generations caught the light beautifully. My auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo, with small white roses woven throughout exactly the romantic Southern belle look I dreamed of since I was a little girl. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," my mother said, tears already forming in her eyes as she adjusted my veil. Mom had been emotional all morning, constantly dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she'd embroidered specifically for today. "Thank you, Mama," I replied, using the Southern endearment that always made her smile. "I can't believe it's finally happening." Through the tall windows, I could see the wedding guests beginning to take their seats in the garden. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows on either side of the moss-covered aisle that led to an archway draped in cascading white roses and greenery. The string quartet was already playing soft classical music, and servers in crisp white uniforms were making final preparations for the reception that would take place right here in the garden after the ceremony. My 3 bridesmaids bustled around the room in their sage green dresses, each one handling different last-minute details. There was my college roommate Jessica, who had flown in from Denver and had been my rock throughout the entire planning process. My cousin Lily was carefully arranging the train of my dress, making sure every detail was perfect. And then there was Natalie. Natalie had been my best friend since high school. We'd been through everything together: senior prom, college applications, heartbreaks, career changes, and now this. She was the one who had introduced me to Ryan 3 years ago at a 4th of July barbecue in her backyard. They had worked together at the marketing firm downtown, and she'd insisted that we would be perfect for each other. She was right. Ryan. Just thinking his name made my heart flutter the same way it had that first night we met. He was everything I'd ever wanted in a mankind: ambitious, funny, and devastatingly handsome with his dark hair and bright blue eyes. He treated me like I was the most precious thing in the world, opening doors, bringing me flowers for no reason, and listening to me talk about my work at the Children's Hospital with genuine interest. "The photographer wants to get some shots of you before the ceremony," Jessica said, adjusting her own hair in the mirror. "Something about the lighting being perfect right now." I nodded, taking one last look at myself. In 30 minutes, I would be walking down that moss-covered aisle toward the man of my dreams. In an hour, I would be Mrs. Ryan Mitchell. By tonight, we would be dancing our first dance as husband and wife right here in this magical garden, surrounded by everyone we loved most. "Are you nervous?" Lily asked, applying one final coat of lipstick. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly just excited. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for this moment." Natalie, who had been unusually quiet all morning, finally looked up from her phone. There was something in her expression that I couldn't quite read, a tension around her eyes that seemed out of place on such a happy day. "Everything okay, Nat?" I asked. She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, just making sure everything's running on schedule." But something felt off. Natalie was typically the most animated person in any room, always laughing and joking and making everyone else feel at ease. This morning, she seemed distracted, almost anxious. I'd noticed her checking her phone constantly and stepping outside to take several hushed phone calls. Did something happen with the flowers? Or the catering? I pressed, suddenly worried that some disaster was unfolding that no one wanted to tell me about. No, everything's fine with the wedding details," she said quickly. I didn't sleep well last night. Pre-wedding jitters, you know." I accepted her explanation, though something still felt strange. But there wasn't time to dwell on it. The photographer knocked on the door, and soon I was posing for what felt like hundreds of photos throughout the mansion and gardens. The ancient live oak trees provided the perfect backdrop, and I felt like a princess in a fairy tale. As we moved through the gardens for the photos, I caught glimpses of Ryan getting ready with his groomsmen in the carriage house on the other side of the property. Even from a distance, he looked incredibly handsome in his navy suit. His best man, his brother Tommy, was clearly keeping him entertained because I could hear their laughter carrying across the garden. The guests continued to arrive, and I felt overwhelmed by how many people had come to celebrate with us. My colleagues from the Children's Hospital, Ryan's family from Virginia, college friends who had traveled from all over the country, and what felt like half of Charleston society, my mother's influence, of course. 15 minutes, Miss Claire, the wedding coordinator announced, appearing at my side with her ever-present clipboard and headset. 15 minutes. My stomach fluttered with anticipation and nerves. I made my way back to the bridal suite for final touch-ups, and to gather my bouquet, a stunning arrangement of white peonies, roses, and eucalyptus that perfectly matched the garden's romantic aesthetic. My bridesmaids formed a circle around me, each of them holding their smaller bouquets of sage green hydrangeas. This was the moment I'd imagined so many times, my closest friends surrounding me with love and support as I prepared to start the most important chapter of my life. "I love you girls so much," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for making this day so special." Jessica and Lily both teared up immediately, but Natalie still seemed distant. She kept glancing toward the window that faced the direction of the carriage house, and that strange tension in her face had only gotten worse. "Time to line up, ladies," the coordinator announced. We made our way to the mansion's back veranda, where the bridal party would wait before walking down the aisle. Through the French doors, I could see the garden was now full of guests, everyone standing in anticipation. The string quartet had transitioned to more formal processional music. Ryan was already at the altar with Reverend Johnson, the pastor who had baptized me at First Baptist Church 26 years ago. Even from this distance, I could see Ryan smile, the way he kept adjusting his tie nervously, the way he kept looking toward the mansion waiting for his first glimpse of me. "Okay, bridesmaids, it's time," the coordinator whispered. Jessica went first, walking slowly down the aisle with perfect posture and a radiant smile. Then Lily, who waved subtly at her parents in the third row. Finally, it was Natalie's turn. But instead of immediately starting down the aisle, Natalie turned to me. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking as she clutched her bouquet. "Claire," she whispered urgently, "I need to tell you something. Now!" I whispered back, confused. "Nat, you need to walk down the aisle." The coordinator was gesturing frantically for Natalie to begin her walk, but she didn't move. "It can't wait," Natalie said, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, but you have to know before." "Miss Natalie, please," the coordinator hissed. Natalie looked toward the altar, then back at me, her eyes filling with tears. When she spoke, her words hit me like a physical blow. "He slept with her yesterday." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What?" "Ryan. He slept with someone yesterday. I saw them together at the hotel downtown. I'm so sorry, Claire, but I couldn't let you marry him without knowing." I felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. The sounds of the garden, the string quartet, the rustling of guests, the birds in the trees, seemed to fade into a distant buzz. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. "Who?" I managed to whisper. Natalie's face crumpled with anguish. "I don't know her name. But Claire, I saw them with my own eyes. I followed him because I thought he might be planning some kind of surprise for you, but instead, the coordinator appeared at my elbow. "Ladies, we really must. Give us a moment," I said sharply, my voice somehow steady despite the fact that my entire world was collapsing. Through the French doors, I could see Ryan still standing at the altar, still smiling, still adjusting his tie. 200 guests were seated and waiting. The photographer was positioned and ready. The reception was set up and paid for. Everything was perfect, except that the man I was about to marry had apparently betrayed me in the worst possible way just hours before our wedding. "Are you absolutely certain?" I asked Natalie, desperately hoping for some kind of misunderstanding. She nodded miserably. "I wish I wasn't. I've been sick about it all morning, trying to figure out what to do. I almost didn't tell you, but I couldn't live with myself if I let you marry him without knowing the truth." I stood there in my grandmother's wedding dress, holding my perfect bouquet, surrounded by the most beautiful garden in Charleston, and felt my fairy tale crumbling around me. The walk down that moss-covered aisle felt like the longest journey of my life. My legs moved mechanically, one step after another, while my mind raced with questions and disbelief. Every smile from the wedding guests felt like a mockery, every flash from the photographer's camera like an intrusion into my nightmare. Ryan's face lit up when he saw me, his blue eyes sparkling with what looked like genuine love and happiness. How could someone look so perfect, so sincere, while harboring such a devastating secret? As I got closer, I studied his expression for any sign of guilt or deception, but all I saw was my fiancé, the man I thought I knew, completely beaming with joy. When I reached the altar, Ryan took my hands in his, and I felt the familiar warmth and strength that had always made me feel safe. But now, all I could think about was those same hands touching another woman just yesterday. "You look absolutely breathtaking," he whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear, and several guests made soft sounds. I tried to smile, but my face felt frozen. Reverend Johnson began the ceremony with the same warm, familiar voice that had guided me through Sunday services my entire childhood. The words that should have been meaningful and sacred sounded hollow and distant. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Claire and Ryan." I could barely focus on what he was saying. My eyes kept drifting to the guests, wondering if anyone else knew. Did his groomsmen know? His family? Had I been the only one living in ignorance, while everyone else was aware of his betrayal? When it came time for the vows, Ryan spoke first. His voice was steady and full of emotion as he recited the words we had written together during those romantic evenings in our apartment, sharing wine and dreams of our future. "Claire, you are my best friend, my greatest love, and my partner in everything. I promise to cherish you, to be faithful to you, and to build a life with you that's filled with adventure, laughter, and unconditional love." Faithful. The word hit me like a slap. How dare he stand here and promise faithfulness when, according to Natalie, he had broken that promise before we were even married? When it was my turn, I somehow managed to recite my vows, though I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, and I could see concern flickering across some faces in the front row. My mother looked worried, probably thinking I was just overcome with emotion. The ceremony continued with readings and prayers, each moment feeling more surreal than the last. I found myself looking at Natalie, who was standing with the other bridesmaids, looking absolutely miserable. She kept glancing between me and Ryan with an expression of anguish that made my stomach churn. Finally, Reverend Johnson reached the moment I'd been dreading. "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The garden fell silent except for the gentle rustle of Spanish moss in the breeze. This was my moment. I could stop this right here, right now. I could demand the truth in front of everyone. But as I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, my parents, Ryan's family, all our friends who had traveled so far to be here, I felt paralyzed. The moment passed. Then, by the power vested in me, Reverend Johnson continued. But I couldn't let it continue. Not like this. Not without knowing the truth. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through the ceremony. Everyone froze. Reverend Johnson looked confused, Ryan looked concerned, and I could hear murmurs rippling through the crowd. "I'm sorry," I said, louder now so everyone could hear. "I need to speak with Ryan privately for a moment." "Claire, what's wrong?" Ryan asked, his brow furrowed with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "Please, just give me a moment." The murmurs grew louder. People were shifting in their seats, looking at each other with bewildered expressions. The photographer had lowered his camera, clearly unsure whether he should be documenting this unexpected turn of events. "Perhaps we could," Reverend Johnson started, clearly trying to restore some semblance of order. "Ryan," I said, looking directly into those blue eyes that had captivated me 3 years ago, "I need you to tell me the truth about yesterday." Something flickered across his face so quickly that if I hadn't been studying him intently, I might have missed it. But I saw it. A flash of panic, quickly masked by confusion. "Yesterday? Claire, what are you talking about? Where were you yesterday afternoon?" Ryan glanced around at the sea of faces watching us, clearly uncomfortable with this public interrogation. I had some last-minute errands to run, getting my suit from the tailor, picking up the rings, things like that. "And where else?" "Claire, can we please discuss this after?" "Where else, Ryan?" My voice echoed across the garden, and several guests gasped. I could see my mother half rising from her seat, her face pale with shock. Ryan's composure finally cracked. The confident, loving expression he'd worn throughout the ceremony dissolved into something that looked like fear. "I don't understand why you're asking me this," he said, but his voice had lost its steady certainty. "Because someone saw you," I said, my voice shaking with a combination of rage and heartbreak. "Someone saw you at the hotel downtown. With another woman." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Ryan's face went white, and I saw his hands begin to tremble. "Claire, I can explain. So it's true." It wasn't a question. The guilt was written all over his face now, the careful mask finally slipping away completely. Around us, I could hear shocked gasps and whispered conversations as the reality of what was happening began to sink in for our wedding guests. It didn't mean anything," he said desperately. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. I love you, Claire. I want to marry you." "You slept with another woman the day before our wedding," I said, each word deliberate and clear. "And it didn't mean anything. We were both drinking, and I was nervous about today, and she was there. It was stupid and meaningless, and I regret it more than you'll ever know." The confession hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Behind Ryan, I could see Tommy, his best man, looking absolutely stunned. The groomsmen were shifting uncomfortably, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. "Who was she?" I asked. Ryan closed his eyes. "Someone I work with. It doesn't matter who. It matters to me. Jessica from accounting," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. Jessica from accounting. I tried to picture her, a petite blonde who Ryan had mentioned occasionally in passing. Someone who worked in the same building, who probably knew all about our wedding, who knew exactly what she was doing when she slept with someone else's fiancé the night before his wedding. "You're right," I said, my voice surprisingly calm now that the truth was finally out in the open. "It doesn't matter who she was. What matters is that you chose her over me. You chose one night with a coworker over a lifetime with a woman you supposedly love. That's not true. I chose you. I'm here, aren't I? I want to marry you. You want to marry me now that you've been caught. If Natalie hadn't seen you, would you have ever told me?" Ryan's silence was answer enough. I looked out at the garden full of people, our families, our friends, all the people who loved us and wanted to see us happy. They had dressed up, traveled here, taken time off work, brought gifts, all to celebrate what they thought was a beautiful love story. Instead, they were witnessing its spectacular collapse. "I'm sorry," I announced to the crowd, my voice carrying across the stunned silence. "The wedding is canceled." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but also somehow liberating. Like finally exhaling after holding my breath for too long. I pulled off my engagement ring, the ring Ryan had given me 6 months ago in this very garden, getting down on one knee beside the fountain while tourists applauded and placed it in his palm. "Claire, please," he said, tears streaming down his face now. "Don't do this. We can work through this. I love you." "If you loved me," I replied, "you wouldn't have needed to work through anything." With that, I turned and walked back down that moss-covered aisle, my grandmother's wedding dress rustling with each step, leaving behind the ruins of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The bridal suite felt like a tomb. I sat on the antique velvet settee, still in my grandmother's wedding dress, staring at my reflection in the mirror that had shown me such a happy bride just hours earlier. The woman looking back at me now was a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, with mascara streaked down her cheeks despite the supposed waterproof formula. My bridesmaids hovered around me uncertainly. Jessica kept wringing her hands and muttering about how she never saw this coming, while Lily sat beside me holding a box of tissues that she'd somehow materialized from somewhere. Natalie stood by the window, looking absolutely wrecked with guilt and sorrow. "Honey, you did the right thing," my mother said for the 3rd time, though her voice shook with the effort of staying strong. She'd been crying on and off since I'd made my announcement in the garden, alternating between comforting me and making angry phone calls to various vendors about canceling services. "Did I?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. 200 people just witnessed the most humiliating moment of my life. The whole thing is probably already on social media. Better than spending your whole marriage wondering what else he was hiding, Lily said quietly. There was a soft knock on the door, and Tommy, Ryan's brother and best man, peered in hesitantly. "Claire, could I talk to you for a minute?" I almost said no, but something in his expression made me nod. He stepped inside, still in his groomsman's suit but with his tie loosened and his face etched with exhaustion. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am," he began. "And I wanted you to know that we the groomsmen we had no idea. None of us knew what Ryan had done." "I believe you," I said, and I did. Tommy was one of the most honest people I'd ever met, and he looked genuinely devastated by his brother's actions. "He's asking to see you," Tommy continued carefully. "He's downstairs in the library, and he's pretty broken up. I'm not saying you should talk to him, that's completely your decision, but he asked me to tell you that he needs to explain." "Explain what?" I asked bitterly. He already explained. He slept with Jessica from accounting because he was nervous and drunk. "What else is there to say?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. I think there might be more to the story. He keeps saying it wasn't just a random hookup, that there's something else you need to know." My stomach clenched. "More? What could possibly be worse than what he's already told me?" "I don't know," Tommy admitted. "He won't tell me. He says he can only tell you." I looked around the room at the faces of the women who loved me most in the world. My mother's expression was fiercely protective, clearly ready to bodily prevent me from seeing Ryan if that's what I wanted. Jessica and Lily looked concerned but supportive of whatever decision I made. Natalie, who had started this whole nightmare by telling me the truth, just looked sad. "What do you think I should do?" I asked the room in general. "Honey, you don't owe him anything," my mother said immediately. "He forfeited his right to explanations when he betrayed you. But maybe you need to hear it," Natalie said quietly. "For your own closure, if nothing else." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to strip out of this wedding dress, drive straight home, and never think about Ryan Mitchell again. But another part of me, the part that had loved him for 3 years, needed to understand how we had gotten to this point. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll talk to him, but not alone. Natalie, will you come with me?" Natalie looked surprised. "Are you sure? I'm the one who told you about seeing them together. He might not want to talk in front of me." "I don't care what he wants," I said, standing up and smoothing down my dress. "You were brave enough to tell me the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I trust you." We made our way downstairs to the library, a cozy room lined with leather-bound books and furnished with antique chairs and a fireplace. Ryan was sitting in one of the wingback chairs, his head in his hands. He looked up when we entered, and I was shocked by how destroyed he looked. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair disheveled, and his suit wrinkled. "Claire," he said, starting to stand. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stay where you are and tell me what Tommy says I need to know." Ryan glanced at Natalie uncertainly. Could we talk privately?" "No. She stays. She's the only reason I found out the truth at all, so she gets to hear whatever truth you're finally ready to tell." Ryan closed his eyes and took a shuddering breath. "Okay, you're right. You deserve to know everything." He was quiet for so long that I thought he might have changed his mind. Then he looked up at me with an expression of such anguish that I almost felt sorry for him. "It wasn't a random hookup," he said. "Jessica and we've been seeing each other for 6 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank into the chair across from him, feeling like all the air had been sucked out of the room. 6 months, I repeated numbly. "It started as an emotional affair," Ryan continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was going through a divorce, and I was feeling overwhelmed with all the wedding planning. We would talk during lunch breaks, and she understood what I was going through with work stress in a way that you didn't, because you were so focused on the hospital and the wedding, and you decided that was my fault somehow." I asked, my voice sharp. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying I was weak and selfish, and I made excuses for behavior that was inexcusable." "When did it become physical?" Ryan winced. 3 months ago. The night of your birthday party. My birthday party. The surprise party he had thrown for me at our apartment, with all our friends and family there. The party where he'd been so attentive and loving, where he'd given me the beautiful necklace I was wearing under my wedding dress right now. "You slept with her the night of my birthday party?" I asked, my voice rising. After everyone left, I told you I was going to clean up and that you should go to bed because you'd had so much wine. But instead, I met Jessica at her apartment. I felt sick. That night, I'd fallen asleep feeling so loved and grateful for the wonderful man in my life. I'd actually written in my journal about how lucky I was to have found someone so thoughtful and caring. Meanwhile, he was across town betraying me in the most intimate way possible. And yesterday, I managed to ask. Yesterday was supposed to be the last time. We had agreed that after today, after the wedding, it would be over completely. We were meeting to say goodbye. How noble of you both, I said sarcastically. Ryan flinched. I know how it sounds. I know how horrible this is. But Claire, I swear to you I was going to end it. I was going to be faithful to you from today forward. Faithful from today forward? I stood up abruptly, rage finally overwhelming the numbness. You were going to be faithful starting from our wedding day? How generous of you! What about the 6 months of lies? What about my birthday? What about every morning you kissed me goodbye and every evening you came home and pretended to be the perfect fiancé while you were carrying on an affair? I love you, Ryan said desperately. I know that doesn't make sense given what I've done, but I do love you. Jessica was an escape from all the pressure and responsibility, but you're the woman I want to spend my life with. You want to spend your life with me, but you needed an escape from the pressure of marrying me? Do you hear how insane that sounds? Ryan started crying again, deep, body-shaking sobs that might have moved me if I weren't so consumed with fury and betrayal. Natalie, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Ryan, why didn't you just call off the wedding months ago if you were so unhappy? He looked up at her with red, swollen eyes. Because I wasn't unhappy. That's what makes this so crazy. I love Claire. I want to marry her. Jessica was she was something separate, something that didn't have anything to do with my real life. I was your real life, I shouted. The woman you were sleeping with while I was picking out flowers and tasting cakes and addressing invitations was your real life. I was just the woman stupid enough to plan a future with someone who was already planning his escapes from it. The pain in my chest was so intense I could barely breathe. This wasn't just about infidelity, this was about the complete reconstruction of everything I thought I knew about the past year of my life. Every sweet moment, every romantic gesture, every time he told me he loved me was now tainted by the knowledge that he was living a double life. What was the plan, Ryan? I asked, my voice deadly calm now. Were you going to keep seeing Jessica after we got married? Or were you just going to find someone else to be your escape from the pressure of being my husband? I don't know, he whispered. I honestly don't know. I was just taking it one day at a time and hoping. Hoping what? Hoping I could figure out how to be the man you deserved, while still having this other part of my life that made me feel free. The absolute selfishness of that statement took my breath away. He wanted to have me as a stable, devoted wife while maintaining the excitement of an affair on the side. He wanted all the benefits of my love and commitment while giving me only a fraction of his own. Get out, I said quietly. Claire, please, get out, I screamed, loud enough that I was sure people throughout the mansion could hear me. Get out of this room, get out of this building, get out of my life. I never want to see you again. Ryan stood up slowly, looking at me with an expression of complete devastation. For a moment, I thought he might try to argue, might make one more desperate plea for forgiveness. But something in my face must have told him that this conversation was over. He walked to the door, then turned back one last time. Claire, I know you'll never forgive me, but I need you to know that losing you is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Good, I replied. I hope it haunts you for the rest of your life. After he left, I collapsed back into the chair and finally let myself completely fall apart. 1 year later, I stood in the same magnolia gardens where my life had imploded so spectacularly, but this time I was here for a completely different reason. The children's hospital where I worked was hosting their annual fundraising gala, and as the newly promoted head of pediatric nursing, I was one of the event coordinators. The irony wasn't lost on me returning to the scene of my greatest humiliation to celebrate one of my greatest professional achievements. But that's what the past year had taught me. Life has a way of transforming your worst moments into the foundation for something better. Claire, The catering staff needs to know if we want the cocktail tables set up near the fountain or closer to the mansion, said Andrea, my colleague and fellow nurse who had become one of my closest friends since the wedding disaster. Let's do them near the fountain, I decided. The acoustics are better there for the speeches. I was dressed in a simple but elegant navy dress that I'd bought specifically for tonight. It was nothing like the elaborate gown I would have worn to events as Ryan's wife. It was more understated, more authentically me. My hair was shorter now, cut into a sleek bob that made me feel sophisticated and confident. I'd learned a lot about myself in the past year, including the fact that I'd been trying to be someone else's version of who I should be for far too long. The breakup, or rather, the dramatic public implosion of my relationship had been brutal in the immediate aftermath. 4 weeks, I'd been the subject of Charleston gossip, with everyone from the grocery store clerk to my mother's bridge club wanting to know the real story about what had happened at the Mitchell wedding that never was. But somewhere around month 3, when the initial shock and humiliation had faded, I'd started to realize something surprising. I was actually happier than I had been in years. Without the constant stress of wedding planning, without the pressure of trying to be the perfect fiancé, without the nagging feeling that something was wrong that I'd been carrying around for months without realizing it, I'd rediscovered parts of myself that had gotten buried under the weight of being half of a couple. The musicians are here, Andrea informed me, checking her tablet. And the flowers look absolutely gorgeous. I looked around the garden, which was decorated with simple white lights and arrangements of seasonal flowers. It was beautiful in a completely different way from how it had looked on my wedding day, less formal, less elaborate, but somehow more magical. Claire! A familiar voice behind me made me turn around. It was Natalie. We'd maintained our friendship through everything, though it had taken some work to rebuild the trust and comfort we'd once shared. She looked nervous as she approached, carrying a small gift bag. I wasn't sure if you'd want me here tonight, she said hesitantly. Of course I want you here, I replied and meant it. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I'll be grateful to you forever. She smiled with obvious relief. I brought you something. A little good luck gift for your first big event as department head. Inside the bag was a beautiful silver bracelet with a small compass charm attached. So you'll always know which direction you're heading, she said with a smile. It's perfect, I said, fastening it around my wrist immediately. Thank you. So how are you feeling about tonight? She asked as we watched the catering staff put the finishing touches on the cocktail stations. Excited, nervous, proud, I said honestly. A year ago, I was so focused on planning a wedding and being someone's wife that I'd completely lost sight of my own ambitions. Now I'm running a department, organizing fundraisers, and actually making a difference in kids' lives every day. And personally, are you dating anyone? I smiled. I'm seeing someone. His name is Peter, and he's a teacher at the elementary school where we do our community outreach programs. But I'm taking it very slowly. I'm learning the difference between being ready for a relationship and being desperate for one. It was true. Peter was wonderful, kind, funny, intellectually curious, and completely honest about everything from his feelings to his weekend plans. He knew all about what had happened with Ryan, and instead of seeing it as baggage, he seemed to admire the strength it had taken me to walk away from a situation that wasn't right for me. I'm proud of you, Natalie said softly. You've become exactly who you were meant to be. As if summoned by our conversation, Peter appeared at my side, looking handsome in his charcoal suit. He taught 3rd grade, and had the kind of genuine warmth that made children and adults feel instantly comfortable around him. How's our event coordinator doing? He asked, slipping his arm around my waist in a gesture that felt natural and supportive rather than possessive. Slightly panicked but mostly excited, I admitted. The place looks incredible, he said, looking around the garden. Hard to believe this is the same spot where my life fell apart and then started over. I finished with a smile. It's actually kind of perfect, don't you think? Full circle. The guests began arriving as the sun set, casting the garden in that magical golden hour light that had once made me think of fairy tales. Now it just looked beautiful, without all the desperate romanticism I'd once attached to it. Dr. Harrison, the hospital's chief of staff, approached our group with a warm smile. Claire, I wanted to personally thank you for organizing tonight. The early ticket sales alone have already exceeded our fundraising goals. It's been my pleasure, I replied. When you're passionate about something, the work doesn't feel like work. As the evening progressed, I found myself genuinely enjoying the event I'd spent months planning. I moved through the crowd with confidence, checking on details, introducing donors to medical staff, and sharing stories about the children whose lives had been transformed by the hospital's programs. Around 9 o'clock, as I was checking with the catering manager about dessert service, I noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance to the garden. My heart stopped. It was Ryan. He looked differente, thinner, older somehow, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. He was wearing a dark suit and holding what appeared to be an invitation, though I couldn't imagine how he'd gotten one. Peter appeared at my side immediately, following my gaze. "Is that?" "Yes," I said quietly. "That's him. Do you want me to ask security to escort him out?" I considered it. This was my night, my event, my triumph. Ryan had no right to be here, no right to intrude on this moment. But as I watched him standing there uncertainly, clearly debating whether to approach me, I realized I wasn't afraid or angry. I was just curious. "No," I said finally. "Let me talk to him. But stay close, okay?" Peter nodded, squeezing my hand supportively before stepping back a respectful distance. I walked over to where Ryan stood, my heels clicking on the stone pathway with a confidence I'd never possessed a year ago. "Hello, Ryan," I said calmly. "Claire." He looked surprised that I'd approached him, as if he'd expected to be thrown out immediately. You look incredible. Really successful and happy." "I am successful and happy," I replied simply. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the fundraiser from Tommy. He mentioned that you were organizing it, and I wanted to see how you were doing. And I wanted to apologize properly this time." "You apologized a year ago." "No, a year ago I made excuses and tried to justify the unjustifiable. Tonight I just want to say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for betraying you. I'm sorry for lying to you. And I'm sorry for wasting 3 years of your life." I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation and self-serving explanations that had characterized our last conversation. But what I saw instead was genuine remorse and what looked like hard-earned wisdom. "You didn't waste 3 years of my life," I said, surprising myself with the words. "Those 3 years taught me things about myself that I needed to learn. They brought me to this moment, to this life that I'm actually proud of." Ryan's eyes filled with tears. "I heard you got promoted. Department head. That's incredible, Claire. You always deserved recognition for how good you are at what you do." "Thank you." We stood there for a moment in the garden where we'd almost gotten married, surrounded by the sound of laughter and conversation from people celebrating the work I loved most in the world. "Are you happy?" I asked him, and realized I genuinely wanted to know the answer. "I'm learning to be," he said honestly. "I've been in therapy for the past 8 months, trying to figure out why I sabotaged the best thing in my life. I'm learning about myself, about patterns I inherited from my family, about why I was so afraid of real intimacy that I had to create chaos to feel safe." It was a more mature and self-aware answer than I'd ever heard from him during our relationship. And Jessica, that ended the day of our wedding. She wanted nothing to do with me after everything came out. She was ashamed of what we'd done, and honestly, so was I. He paused. "I'm not seeing anyone right now. I'm trying to become the kind of person who's capable of being in a healthy relationship before I inflict myself on anyone else." I found myself impressed by his honesty and growth, even though it came too late for us. "I'm glad you're doing that work," I said. "Everyone deserves to be happy, including you. But it's work you should have done before you proposed to me." "I know," he said quietly. "I know I can't undo the damage I caused. But I needed you to know that I understand now how badly I hurt you and how wrong I was. You deserved so much better." "I did deserve better," I agreed. "And now I have it." As if on cue, Peter appeared at my side again, not possessive or threatening, just present and supportive. The contrast between his calm confidence and Ryan's anxious energy was striking. "Ryan, this is Peter," I said. "Peter, this is Ryan." The two men shook hands politely, and I could see Ryan taking in the obvious differences between them. Peter's relaxed demeanor, his genuine smile, the way he stood close to me without seeming to need to claim ownership. "It's nice to meet you," Peter said, and seemed to mean it. "Claire's told me about the work you do in marketing. It sounds interesting." It was exactly the kind of gracious, mature response that made me fall a little more in love with Peter every day. No drama, no territorial behavior, just simple human decency. "Thank you for coming tonight, Ryan," I said, meaning it. "And thank you for the apology. It means more than you know to hear that you understand what happened between us." "Thank you for not having me escorted out," he replied with a rueful smile. "I probably deserved it." "We all deserve the chance to grow and change," I said. "I hope you continue to do both." He nodded, then looked around the garden one more time. "This place suits you better as a fundraiser than it did as a wedding venue. You're clearly exactly where you're supposed to be." With that, he walked away, disappearing into the Charleston evening as quietly as he'd appeared. "You okay?" Peter asked, slipping his arm around me again. "I'm perfect," I said, and realized I meant it completely. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the catering staff had cleaned up, Peter and I sat on the mansion's veranda with glasses of champagne, looking out over the garden where my old life had ended and my new one had truly begun. "Successful evening," Peter said, raising his glass in a toast. "Successful year," I corrected, clinking my glass against his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my contemplative mood. "Just how strange life is," I said. "A year ago, I thought my story was going to be about becoming Mrs. Ryan Mitchell and living this conventional, expected life. Tonight I realize that my real story is just beginning." "What do you think the next chapter looks like?" Peter asked. I looked out at the garden, then at the man beside me, someone who asked questions because he was genuinely curious about my answers, who supported my ambitions instead of competing with them, who had shown me what it felt like to be loved for exactly who I was rather than who someone needed me to be. "I think the next chapter is about building something real," I said. "Something based on honesty and genuine compatibility and shared values, rather than just the idea of being in love." "That sounds like a pretty good story to me," Peter said, leaning over to kiss me softly. As we sat there in the garden where I'd once had my heart broken in the most public way possible, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for Natalie's courage in telling me the truth. Gratitude for my own strength in walking away from what looked right but felt wrong. Gratitude for the year of self-discovery that had led me to this moment. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing that never happened to you. Sometimes having your fairy tale destroyed is the only way to discover that you're strong enough to write a better story entirely. The garden was quiet now except for the gentle sound of the fountain and the distant music of Charleston's nightlife. Spanish moss swayed in the breeze, and the scent of jasmine filled the air just like it had on my wedding day a year ago. But this time, instead of feeling like the heroine of someone else's story, I felt like the author of my own. And that made all the difference.